What's up, Strike Team, and welcome back to another episode of Strike Team Official. Today we're going to have our very first reaction video, something I've been looking to do for a long time. We're going to take a look at this video by Armchair Violence, which is a martial art YouTuber. I don't know very much about him. I've seen maybe one or two of his videos, and he has something here called the actual best martial art for self-defense. So I'm curious to see what he's going to say, especially because I don't really know him that well. So I want to know where his head is at and what route he's going to go with this. This is a very triggering topic for some. So let's go ahead and see what he has to say.
A common recurring question in martial arts is which martial art is best for self-defense. Now, a lot of you might say mixed martial arts because it gives you a bit of everything. But that's cheating. That's not the question, because MMA just steals bits and pieces from other martial arts. When someone asks which martial art is best, you can't just say all of them. So let's limit the question to cohesive, singular martial arts.
That is a good point. This is an issue I've come up when I've tried to have this conversation with people, and they're like, MMA. And then anything I say from any other like specific martial art, they'll just be like, well, that can be a part of MMA too. It's a very common cop-out. So I appreciate that he's setting it up like this. And also, I'm recognizing we're going straight to, which makes sense in martial art, we're going straight to the actual fighting side of self-defense and none of the other, honestly, more important parts like de-escalation and things like that. So this is strictly for the combat side.
And the martial art that's the absolute best for self-defense is wrestling. It's barely even a contest. And
what? Wrestling? That's wild. I mean, wrestling is good. Don't get me wrong. It's guys who can grapple dominate in most one-on-one fights. That's definitely true. But I just feel like wrestling has no strikes, no punches. Like if we're really talking about limiting to one style, I'm assuming that means you can't use techniques from other systems, right? So I'm assuming that would mean like no punching, no kicking. I mean, wrestling's good, but I just feel like there are other options, like Muay Thai or, you know, anything where you're allowed to punch and kick people. Like, I don't know. He's off to a bad start.
And more specifically, the American folk-style collegiate/scholastic wrestling, which I am henceforth going to refer to as American wrestling. There's a ton of reasons why wrestling is the best art for self-defense. First of all, the winner pretty much had to be a grappling art. You might be tempted to pick a striking art because you could theoretically get quick knockouts, but grappling arts can slam people on their head. And when a really good striker fights a really good grappler, and those are the only skill sets they have, the grappler wins. Pretty much every time.
I'm annoyed to say that that's mostly true. I mean, not always, right? If you're doing a high-level Muay Thai fighter, a high-level karate guy or whatever, like talking like Raymond Daniels, Stephen Thompson, like a high-level grappler doesn't always win. We can see that at an MMA. But I guess we're looking at it from a perspective of like the striker can't no takedown defense. Like if we're really separating the two systems fully, then like no takedown defense and all that a grappler has to do is take you down one time. And then it's pretty much over. Because if you've never grappled and a grappler gets you on the ground, the fight is pretty much over. So I kind of understand where he's coming from with that. But let's continue.
Because most grapplers have ways to get standing fights to the ground, but most strikers don't have ways of getting back up. And we saw this dynamic play out in the early UFC events, where grapplers absolutely dominated.
I feel like that statement's going to make a lot of people upset, and they're going to try to give you reasons why boxers are good enough.
I am upset, and I don't like this at all.
Boxing's fine. It's just not the best. If the striker doesn't get a knockout immediately, they lose. If you pick one art for self-defense and you pick striking, you better hope and pray that you never meet any grapplers. But there are a lot of good functional grappling arts, so why is wrestling better? Well, first of all, the culture of wrestling in general, and American wrestling specifically, is much better at churning out effective fighters. As an example, look at other combat sports. If you've been to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, or boxing class, you've probably seen people that take it really seriously and want to be the best. But you've seen a lot more people that casually dabble, don't compete, and just come to practice because it's a fun way to get out of the house. They might be older or out of shape or not quite challenge themselves as much because they're just there to have fun. And most martial arts classes have to go easy enough to get these people in the door and have them keep taking lessons. And coming to martial arts to have fun is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But we're talking about what churns out the best fighters.
Okay, I think I see where he's going with this. If we're talking about general averages of like the skill level, wrestlers are on average very highly skilled compared to most other martial arts. There are very few wrestlers that aren't competitive wrestlers. People don't wrestle for fun. So like the average wrestler is going to be more skilled than the average person who probably does possibly any other martial art, because there's a lot of real casuals in every system other than really wrestling. I mean, jiu-jitsu, judo, karate for sure, Muay Thai. Yeah, everyone else has a lot of casuals. And you'll notice that too. There's not many just casual wrestling gyms like around. It's actually really hard to find a wrestling gym outside of like a college or something. So I get his point there. If we're talking general averages, the average wrestler is possibly one of the highest level martial artists you can find. Oh.
Because when you go to a wrestling practice, those casual practitioners don't exist. No one in a wrestling room is just coming to get out of the house. They're all there to compete. Everyone that wrestles is expected to take part in wrestling competitions. Everyone in that room is there to win, and that has a dramatic effect on the atmosphere and culture of that room. Practice is harder, expectations are higher, and having fun isn't as important as being effective. While wrestling is much more demanding than other martial arts, it also churns out skilled athletes at a rate that other arts could only dream of. Because virtually all wrestlers compete, wrestling teams are able to create a culture more conducive to performance. When only a few people in your class are really focused on being fit and athletic, you're not going to feel all that pressured to put in the work. But
he's literally saying everything I had just said. So, okay, I guess we were definitely going along the same train of thought.
if everyone in your class is working their tail off to become a phenomenal athlete, you're probably going to put in the work too. Peer pressure is a powerful thing. And when most of your team is putting themselves in a do-or-die competition mindset, you're going to end up going at a lot higher intensity when you spar them. When the vast majority of the students are gearing up for competitions, it's going to change the attitude and intensity level of the rest of the room. And you're going to get swept up in that sense of urgency, whether you choose to or not. This leads to a much more demanding and results-focused gym culture that, while difficult and exhausting, leads to higher effort and better results because a rising tide lifts all boats.
All right, he's making some solid points here. Again, like I said, everybody in wrestling is competing. That's very true. It does seriously push the level of the entire room up. There's a reason where you go to even like a striking class, where you have a normal class where people are acting, and training normally, and then you have your competition class where everyone's pushing themselves to the next level, and it's a very different environment. Wrestling is all competition classes for the most part, at least as far as I'm aware. So that would make a very big difference on the average of the skill set of everyone involved. So he's making a solid point. If you join a wrestling club, you're going to be pushed. And if you join a Muay Thai or karate group or Hapkido or Jiu-Jitsu, you're not necessarily going to be pushed the same. They'll let you coast. So that is very true. He's making a solid point here. And also, wrestling has some of the best styles of training when it comes to repetition and drilling out of any martial arts style. So they really do push out a lot of high-level people. So I'm understanding that, but again, that's still not dealing with some of the issues of self-defense. Like, you can't punch people. I mean, you can pick someone and drop them on their head, but I don't know. I mean, again, if you have multiple attackers in real life, multiple attackers is always a bad situation. Even as a striker, you're likely to not have a good time. That being said, I've seen high-level strikers mess with untrained people, even 2 or 3 of them, and been able to handle themselves. I sparred 2 untrained people in one before. Like, when you're dealing with untrained people versus a trained person, it's a lot easier. And I feel like when you're dealing with grappling, That's not necessarily the same. Even untrained people can find a way to come in and cause some serious issues. Let's continue.
This kind of gym culture is something that very few BJJ, Muay Thai, or Judo gyms are able to copy because they have a much higher percentage of students that don't intend to compete. If you've ever grappled against a high-level wrestler, you might have experienced this difference for yourself. They often operate at a much higher intensity, and even teenage wrestlers have levels of explosive athleticism that advanced practitioners of other arts never develop. This intensity is actually a big deal in a fight. If you spar a high-level Muay Thai or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, they leave you feeling tired, confused, and uncomfortable. But if you go against a high-level wrestler, it feels like you're being continuously run over by a car the entire match. Plenty of people can make me feel unskilled, but only wrestlers have made me feel like a weak little baby.
I would disagree with this. Specifically, I do actually feel that almost anyone at a high level, if they're putting on the pace, can make you feel like a weak little baby if they're much higher level than you. Even strikers. I think a lot of the difference here, though, is a striker, if you're going up and striking with someone who's a much higher level than you, they're probably nice enough not to hurt you. So they're not putting on that same level of destructive power. That being said, when it comes to grapplers, because you can put in a lot of effort and not seriously injure somebody, they feel more comfortable running you over like a train. Simultaneously, when you go up against a good jiu-jitsu guy, say you just started and you're going against a black belt who decides to put the paces on you, you feel like you're drowning. It may not be running over by a train, but you feel like you're drowning and you feel like a little kid. So I don't know if I fully agree with this statement. I think most martial arts can actually make you feel pretty childish if you're fighting somebody at a much higher level.
In addition, this constant level of intensity also breeds very tough people. There's a common saying in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu: how do you turn a black belt into a brown belt? You punch them. How do you turn them into a purple belt? You punch them again. You know what a wrestler becomes when you punch them? Angry.
That's true. That is actually very true. When you hit a wrestler, I will say this, wrestling creates so much grit. I often say that I wish I had started off as a young kid, either in football or wrestling, for the grit that it gives you. Wrestling would be number one. But I didn't do it. And I feel like that was a huge area in my martial art life where I had a lack. I didn't start off with any grit at all. And wrestling develops that. So you're right. Punching a wrestler probably will not do that much. They'll eat it and keep going forward.
Common problem with grappling arts and martial arts in general is that they don't prepare you for the intensity and chaos of an actual fight. Wrestling usually does. Now you might be thinking, hey, there's plenty of arts similar to American wrestling, like catch wrestling or various kinds of folk wrestling. Wouldn't those be just as good? And the answer is, not usually. The reason is because they don't usually have the same kind of volume or infrastructure behind them. You see, when a martial art gets more popular, you get more minds working on the same problems, more funding, and a larger number of world-class athletes. All of this leads to greater innovation and a higher quality of athlete. As an example, look at the time a catch wrestling world champion was easily beaten by an unranked Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. Is this because catch wrestling fundamentally sucks? No, it's because catch wrestling is tiny. You can't be a big fish in a small pond because the small pond doesn't have enough resources for you to grow. A lot of high-level grapplers that came from catch wrestling ultimately end up training with and competing against Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners. Sports like freestyle, Greco-Roman, and American wrestling, however, are more than large enough for anyone to reach their potential. In addition to general advantages in mindset, fitness, and intensity, wrestling also has many aspects specifically useful for self-defense encounters. First of all, wrestlers have comparatively short matches, usually maxing out at 7 minutes. This means that they operate at a much higher pace than other combat sports. And when we look at videos of street fights, this higher pace is usually how the fights go down. This means that wrestlers are more likely to be comfortable with the level of speed and energy in a street fight compared to practitioners from other combat sports.
All right, he just made another really good point. Man, he's killing me right now because originally I wasn't agreeing with him, but he's making a lot of good points here. Wrestling is high-paced. Street fights are high-paced. Even Muay Thai, which is a very well-respected striking art, especially if you're training from a really traditional place where you're starting off slow. Muay Thai is known to start off slowly, especially if you're training out in Thailand, because the betting culture, the first 1 and 2 rounds are designed for people to place their bets. So a lot of Muay Thai guys don't start off swinging. They do a bit more here in America, but you'll take your time and you'll set up your jab. You'll try and get a read on the person, and that's not a real thing in a street fight. So he does have a good point about having that high intensity, crazy pace consistently that wrestlers do have. So that's a good point. And again, you look at other martial arts like karate and taekwondo and things like that, when it's just blast, like that's not a thing that's heavily focused on in the majority of schools. Again, I'm talking about averages here. You might go to a school that works perfectly on all these things. I don't know your personal situation. But on average, he's making some good points. These are issues.
Second of all, wrestling might also be a legally safer alternative than most other arts. You see, self-defense is primarily a legal term, and how you handle the encounter will determine whether you defended yourself or go to prison. Exactly what you have to do depends on the laws in your area, but a common requirement is that you can only hurt someone if they are an active threat. Arts like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu advocate for position over submission, meaning that you should be in control of the fight and in a dominant position before going for a submission. And from a tactical standpoint, that is absolutely correct. Unfortunately, it's often a crime. If you're mounting someone and in complete control of the fight, you can't break their arm, depending on where you live. You're in control. They're no longer a threat. We actually have footage of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu experts competently and legally defending themselves. But they usually just take someone down and hold them until law enforcement shows up, which is wrestling.
That's annoyingly accurate. He's making a very good point. I do think it's absolutely ridiculous that you can't put someone to sleep with a rear naked choke if they're trying to kill you. I do think also in many situations you probably could get away with doing some submissions depending on... It's situational though. It really is very situational. And wrestling covers more situations than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu will, when it comes to the fact that just positioning by itself is really a wrestling thing. So I'd give him that. That's fair.
Immediately went for the choke, but then in my mind I'm like, okay, I can't choke him out because it's an assault in New York. So I immediately transitioned to his wrist control, both hands, and during the transition I was able to just get on his back and he was immobilized.
All the submissions they know end up going out the window because all they're allowed to do is control the guy. Likewise, most striking arts have a similar problem in that anything that isn't a clean walk-away knockout doesn't necessarily end the fight. If you manage to rock your attacker with a solid punch, do you follow it up with a combo? Because if you land 20 to 30 unanswered strikes in a row and give your attacker brain trauma, the prosecutor might not believe that you were the victim.
He's making a point here too. A lot of the striking techniques used to defend yourself, if you don't have a way to clearly explain that you were, in fact, the victim, it can turn around to bite you. That is true. Especially if you're good and you cause serious damage to the person. He's making a good point here. Again, I would say in a situation where there's multiple attackers, you are probably in a situation where it's legally easier to prove that you were not the one causing the issue. A single person probably is going to try and jump 3 people at once. So you could probably get away with causing more damage within that self-defense situation. And I do think in that situation, it would probably be better to be able to also punch and kick and strike as well, which is why I would actually lean probably toward either Muay Thai or a very practical version of karate, someone who's drilling in a Muay Thai style but using karate techniques, because that would, and I don't mean point sparring, by the way, I mean like the grappling side of karate, or even like, yeah, that's pretty much where I would go, because you're still allowed to strike, you still have throws and takedowns, but you don't have to follow the person to the ground and hold them, which is very hard to do if his friends will come kick you in the face while you're holding that one dude on the ground.
Sure, you know they were still conscious, and you might believe that they're gonna come right back at you the moment they get their bearings. But it doesn't matter what you believe, it matters what the jury believes, and the only thing the jury knows for sure is that you turned this guy's face into mashed potatoes. Self-defense is a legal term, and we can't talk about self-defense without talking about how the legal system works. Keeping yourself safe is a lot harder to do when you're in prison. Thankfully for wrestlers, taking someone down and controlling them is pretty much the entire art, meaning that what you're practicing is not only effective, but also less legally problematic. American wrestling heavily specializes in ground control, and when Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or mixed martial arts practitioners have to deal with a belligerent person, they often just end up wrestling them. Being able to put someone on the ground, force them into specific positions, and prevent them from getting up is probably the best way to defend yourself without going to jail, and without risking going to jail. Of course, if you need to hurt them, you can just punch them. It doesn't take a genius to figure out how to do that. Wrestling...
Yo, that's cheating. I feel like you can't now say punch them. It doesn't take a genius to figure out how to do that because, I don't know, I just feel like that's cheating. Like, I feel like you're bringing in other martial arts styles when you say stuff like that. Because I feel like you shouldn't be allowed to throw a punch for really trying to specify wrestling by itself. I mean, if that's the case, you got to finish the person, just do jiu-jitsu. Like, jiu-jitsu has the takedowns, but you can also submit the person. And instead of punching, if you can submit the person with a rear naked choke, that is probably a better situation than punching the guy in the face. So now I'm actually going toward jiu-jitsu being the best option. Again, he is talking in this video. Most of these comparisons are you're fighting one person and one person without a weapon. I've noticed that's kind of like the main place that this is aiming at, in which case, again, yeah, I think jiu-jitsu becomes a better situation if you have to talk about punching somebody, because jiu-jitsu has something that can finish someone that's still strictly within its art.
Wrestling's heavy emphasis on takedowns and ground control make it uniquely suited to self-defense, even compared with other grappling arts. And American wrestling's even heavier emphasis on ground control gives it an advantage over other forms of wrestling. But what if you don't want to go to the ground? Well, the way to avoid being taken down is by being the better wrestler. And unlike Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling is a grappling art in which being flat on the ground is never okay.
That's true as well. Being flat on the ground, especially on cement, is never a good idea, even if you are a good person at jiu-jitsu. So the wrestlers do have that benefit.
Keeping a skilled wrestler down is incredibly difficult. If any art is going to prepare you to stay on your feet, it's wrestling. Matches even consist of a round where competitors start on their hands and knees in referee's position, which ensures that every wrestler gets the chance for extensive experience in getting off the ground and resetting. Compounded on this is the fact that wrestling is an ideal base for weapon defense.
Rate the best martial arts sport, knife defense. Wrestling. It's wrestling.
If your opponent has a weapon, your goal is to control their weapon arm and eventually force them into a position where they can no longer bring their weapon to bear. It's pretty easy to see how wrestling would excel at this. Well, what if you actually want to make space so you can draw your firearm? Well, I think Craig Douglas has a pretty good explanation, so I'm just going to let him say it.
What does it require for you to break space and get the gun?
Control.
Which comes from?
Position.
Which comes from? Wrestling?
Yeah, wrestling.
Okay.
Yeah, wrestling.
If you're going to have a successful strategy of staying engaged and drawing the pistol, you have to have wrestling.
But you know what? One of the biggest reasons that American wrestling is the best martial art for self-defense has nothing...
Okay, before it gets into talking about the next part, I do just want to go over the fact that apparently wrestling is also good against weapons. I didn't really think about it in the way that he was talking about it here in this video. What I was thinking is if you're in close grappling, you don't want someone to pull out a knife on you and stab you where you don't see it coming, right? Because I've seen videos of people online grappling and the knife comes out and they don't see it and they get shanked all of a sudden. My thought process is during striking, you have a bit more distance. You can see their hands a little bit better. And, you know, it's in that situation, it's better to see what's happening in front of you. But if you already know they have the knife, or you know they have a gun, wrestling does have a lot of hand controls and gripping that would be really beneficial to maintaining that kind of control and understanding your spatial awareness and things like that. So again, I think it's a different kind of space from what I was thinking, but he is making a solid point. Wrestling does have some good benefits there. So That's true.
Nothing to do with weapons, lawyers, or even what wrestling teaches you. The advantage that wrestling has over every other martial art in the country, and most martial arts in the world, is that, at least here in the US, it's practically free. Nearly every public school system in the country has a wrestling program. And the cost for a student to enroll in 4 to 6 months of training is about $100, depending on the program. That's like $20 a month, which is a fraction of what other martial arts cost. And wrestling practice being at your kid's school means getting them to and from practice is really convenient. There's no additional driving, and practice always works around their school schedule. Almost every kid in the country could be an excellent fighter by the time they graduate high school.
Again, that is a super serious point. As I said earlier in this video, my biggest regret is not going to a school with wrestling and not taking it as a kid. It is very accessible. A lot of people know how to wrestle. And actually, I think that comes to one of the more serious points, which I've had this discussion with people before as well. Why it is so important to have some kind of grappling and understanding of grappling under your belt is because the chances of running into someone who knows how to wrestle is actually extremely high, especially when you think about that human beings, naturally, when we fight, we want to grab anyway. But the fact that it is so common within high schools means a lot of random people walking the street do have a basic understanding of how to wrestle. So that is a very important thing to know how to do. So he's making another good point here.
Plus, how many martial arts can get you college scholarships? If you're in middle school, high school, or college and you're interested in self-defense, why aren't you in wrestling? Also note that while American wrestling has some small advantages over other wrestling styles, they're all pretty close. Greco-Roman, freestyle, or even other folk wrestling traditions that you have in your area are probably going to be better for self-defense than most other martial arts. To summarize, wrestling gives practitioners better intensity, better athleticism, better weapon defense, a better legal defense, a low barrier to entry, and even college scholarships. Wrestling is so good, there are in fact only 2 downsides. Number 1, it's really hard to find a good wrestling place after you graduate school, and you might have to seek out a wrestling club at the nearest public university. And number 2, the singlets do look pretty dumb. Let's all be honest about that, come on.
Alright, again, as a striker, I've recognized my weakness on the ground, and that's something I've been trying to fix for a while. And I spent a little time, still very much a white belt, spent a little time in jiu-jitsu, but I've tried hard to find a good wrestling spot, and it is so difficult to find a place that really has a lot of focus on wrestling, especially a good amount of classes that can work around whatever your schedule is. It's super difficult. At my gym in America, we had a Sambo instructor come in. Sambo has a lot of, especially the way he was teaching it, has a lot of great wrestling fundamentals and usages within it. Just like, think of like, the way he was teaching it in that class is kind of like wrestling, but understanding you're going to get punched, like it was for MMA. It was a great class, and I loved it. But then it ended up not working with my schedule after a little bit of time. And it's just hard to find a good wrestling program that works with your schedule as an adult. So he is making a solid point. And I actually really enjoyed Sambo and the few wrestling classes I've taken. I enjoy it more than BJJ, but it's just hard to find.
But you'll be able to suplex anyone that makes fun of you, so worth it.
But I say I wish I could go back in time and take wrestling in high school. That's exactly what I was. Yeah, so he feels the same as me. Let's make this big. I don't know how this thing works. All right, so I'm not going to lie. I was not feeling him in the beginning, but he's kind of sold me on this. I do understand wrestling has a lot of benefits I didn't really think about in the very, very beginning. And I can definitely understand how this would be one of the top martial arts for self-defense. He's making a lot of sense here, especially if we're not including something like MMA. I do think there is a lot to be said about striking arts when it comes to dealing with more than one person. I understand that that's always a bad situation and you're very likely to lose no matter what. But I do think a striker has a higher chance of success than a grappler, especially if if you want to mix it together, we could say somebody who does something like Sanda, which has takedowns. Even though you're not necessarily controlling, you do have takedowns like to pick up and slam and things like that, and you have the ability to resist a wrestler if you come up against a wrestler on the street, but you also have striking and the ability to move. So I feel like there are systems like that have large benefits. Even a karate practitioner who practices the full art form of karate, which includes a lot of judo throws with strikes and also has controls. But again, that is such a small percentage of karate practitioners that it's hard to really put that in the conversation. So let me know what you guys think. For the most part, he's making a lot of good sense. I don't know if I'd agree that it's number one, but it's definitely up there. Let me know in the comments what you think, any ideas that you guys have. Maybe I'll do a tier list at some point, but this is going to take a lot of thought because there are a lot of things here I didn't really think about that he really brought to the forefront of my attention. So I hope you guys enjoyed. This is a very good video. I'll put the link down below if you want to go view it and show him some love. Definitely deserves it. This is some good work, and I appreciate your time. Also, guys, be sure to please like and subscribe and hit that notification button so you stay up to date on my next video. Again, this is my very first time reacting to anything, so I know I still probably need a little bit of work. Still working on my editing skills and improving, but I promise you guys I am working on trying to bring the best material I can to this channel for the viewers who are watching. So please let me know if you liked it, if this is something you would like me to continue to do. If there's anything you would like me to react to, please put it down there in the comments below, and I will definitely be taking your guys' advice because like I said, I'm a growing channel and I really appreciate your support. So again, please like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I will talk to you next time. All right, peace.